You can start.
Happy morning, everybody. I've been given the topic of exemptions co-recipient. So today we'll just try to see what all how the exemptions with respect to the recipient are. We are going to take see exemptions. There are many exemptions. So if we take a list of the exemptions, it's running in hundreds. So we will not be going into each and every thing as such. We'll just try to take a example in each category and we'll try to take it forward. So one is notifications which is being given by the central government or state government. It has the power to grant exemptions. This is generally defined under section 11 of the CGST or 6 of the IGST Act. The characteristics of exemptions generally in the public interest, and as we are also aware that there are different types of rates which are applicable for different commodities, and in the public interest there are certain services or a supply of goods or services which are on the recommendation of the GST Council. There could be exemption for both goods or services or for both. These exemptions could be either conditional or absolute. Exemptions could be in whole or part. So we'll try to understand a couple of things when we look at the examples. So should come into force from the specified date. Generally, these are getting notified once this particular thing is there. Then here we look at exemptions. There could be classified under different categories. The first one we could look at is based on the specified suppliers. So once there is a specified supplier who is providing a service, based on that, there is an exemption which is being provided for. So suppliers with regard to healthcare could be one of them. Then supplies which may be exempted depending on the nature of supply, irrespective of who has supplied. So if we take one example is supply by way of transfer of a going concern or transfer of a whole, the entire business a business entity as a whole or an independent part thereof, then there is an exemption which is provided. Then exemption by a specified recipient. So when we look at the recipient, it could be when the services are procured by the educational institution or services which are provided to central government, state government, union territory under any insurance scheme for total premium paid is paid by the central government, state government or the union territory, then there's an exemption. Then there are certain exemptions which are specified for specified suppliers and for specified recipients. So the services by way of National Pension Trust to the members against consideration in the form of administration fee. Services by SIC to persons governed by the ESIC Act. So if we look at like this, this can be classified under 4 categories. So when we look at the exemptions, they can be classified under basically 3 type of activities. One is an absolute exemption where the supply of goods or services are unconditionally exempted depending on any of the categories mentioned above. The registered persons generally don't have an option to collect tax when there is an exemption under the GST, unlike the service tax law. Earlier service tax law, when there was exemption, it was an option of the assessee, where either the service provider could take a stand whether he wanted to claim an exemption or not based on declarations. But now under the GST law, we see it has been observed that there is no such options available. Either it has to be full-fledged. I am either diving into the pool, I cannot be outside. So when we take this particular thing, there are 2 types. One is there could be exemption in form of the entire absolute tax, or it could be part. So conditional exemptions, specified conditions need to be satisfied. So for whenever there are conditional exemptions, when we look at the notification 12, we see that 4 columns are there. In the last, the conditions are being mentioned. In case a couple of things where it's a conditional exemption, then the conditions need to be satisfied. So based on this, there could be partial conditional or partial exemption. They are described based on the rates as such as well. So here, when we look at the powers conferred under, there are there are notifications with respect to goods separately and services separately. I'd just like to run through this. I'll not go deep into it, just to have a understanding. So exemption could be supply on specific goods, which is given under 2/2017. It could be like goods supplied by canteen. Then exemption to heavy water and nuclear fuel supplied by Department of Atomic Energy to nuclear power corporation, skim milk or concentration through interstate supply subject to conditions. Then you have second-hand goods, buying and selling of second-hand goods, which were a dealer who is into the business of second-hand goods as per the valuation rules, exemption to scientific equipment. So there are a couple of things like this. Then for services, we have specific notifications where they have granted certain exemptions. It could be under 8/17 or 12/17, 5/18. So there are multiple notifications which are given as such. So here I would like to take one where it is directly in relation to the recipient, where educational services is one amongst them. So when it comes to educational service, so general serial number 66 of the 12/2017 gives an exemption to this classification, where first we will try to understand educational institution is defined two way. It talks about institutions organization providing services by way of preschool, higher secondary, ambit of education where it's a part of the curriculum recognized by the law enforced, education as a part of approved vocational education course. So here, when we look at serial number 66, it tells educational institution here refers to an educational institution providing services by way of preschool education and education up to higher secondary school or equivalent. So what is the coverage? It tells there is a doubt. What is a preschool? Whether a preschool includes daycare also. So is there a fixed curriculum for this particular thing? This is one of the question I have on my on the thing. So wherever there is a complete daycare which is provided, or there is something called as a creche, which is also. So is there a difference between preschool and a creche? So that is one thing we have to examine when we look at this particular thing. And does this, because here the words it is used, it is speaking about by way of preschool education or education up to secondary or higher education. So for this particular class, does it cover a university? For example, a CA institute providing coaching classes, whether it will get covered under this particular classification category. Then private coaching for CA or CLAT or CAT, that could be different categories. So whether this will get covered. So private coaching, 100%, it becomes more of a commercial organization and it will be taxable as such. But we will just try to understand these couple of these two. One is about the university and say institute. After we look at the other aspects which are there under this particular serial number. So the second one, it tells where the services are provided by way of transportation of students, faculty or staff for an educational institution is exempt. So here the what type of permit? See, because when a school hires a bus, there is a different rate under the RTO. Specifically, when we look at, because if the school is the bus is taken in the name of the school, or based on this, I'm not very clear whether based on the arrangement with the school, can the service provider itself buy the vehicle? I'm not sure on this particular part, but there is a permit for schools separately, and there are certain guidelines which has to be followed for the purpose of this. So that's the reason when we look at the school buses are all having a specific color, because there is a demarcation there, and what is the specifications of the vehicle, all these things also have to be looked at. So when we look at this, the documentation from the transporter side, what is that I need to maintain when I am getting into the aspect, when I have entered into the documentation with regard to this particular service, whether it is a transportation, is there any conflict between the permit, what is being allocated, or what sort of conditions are being given under this particular permit itself? So that possibility also has to be looked at. So what has been invoicing? What is the way I'm invoicing and what is the permit giving? So the permit, can it tell, we are basically trying to tell, let's say transportation of service by hire. But is it a leasing? Is there a difference between leasing and hire? So this one particular documentation also has to be looked into. Then transportation, it mentions the transportation of students, faculty and staff. But is the permit allows the transportation of the faculty and students as well under this particular agreement? This particular thing, I'm not very sure on this particular thing, but I felt that these are the aspects which needs to be considered. Then impact. I was trying to analyze, see what are the things which happens when I am hiring a vehicle for students, faculty or staff. When it comes to taking the children for an excursion, is it only a recipient based, or should I also look into what activity or where is this bus going, or where is this vehicle being used for? What is that we need to examine here? As there is no specific guideline here. So transportation of student, faculty or staff is the only thing which is being used. So when we look at this particular thing to an examination center, I'm taking the children because they may have a different examination center which is there. There could be a industrial visit or a bank visit or an educational tour. So there could be a inter-school sports competition which is there. So the students are taken there. So along with the guests and students, maybe the parents are also accompanying them. It could be a school day function which is there. So is there going to be a bifurcation which has to be looked, or whether it is a composite supply which needs to be considered? So this is one aspect which is also to be looked in. See, when we look at serial number 22, there have been a specific entry with respect to services by giving on hire a motor vehicle for transport of students, faculty and staff. I think this is to bring in line with serial number 66. What are the services provided? So probably this is from the service provider angle, this is also being added. So it is very similar, and I think any motor vehicle so which is provided to an educational institution for by way of preschool education or education up to higher secondary or equivalent. So this is what they have very specifically mentioned, and this exemption is available only for up to the 12th grade. After that, I think if it is a college, then it becomes a taxable service per se. Then the other aspect with the next one is with regard to the catering, including midday meals scheme sponsored by the central government, state government or union territory. Is there any difference between supply of goods already prepared? See, what is catering basically? So catering, there is the word is not being defined. So generally in our general nomenclature or general understanding, we see that catering is of two types. So when we look at the catering, what happens is there are a couple of places where when we want somebody to come and serve food at our house for a puja or something. On that particular day, the person comes, he brings the entire food, he serves, he does the entire serving of food, and later they also even vacate the place by cleaning the entire premises as such. But in a couple of contracts where we see it could be a bigger function, or it could be a marriage, or it could be any other program, it could be a convention. In that particular case, the person comes, he brings the ingredients, prepares the foods, and then he gives the food. So here, is there a difference between both of this? So according to me, I think it should not have any difference, because under both the things, my responsibility, the responsibility of the person who is doing the catering, he is going to do he is going to bring the food, or he may bring the provisions, get the food prepared, and it is his responsibility to see that the food is being served at the occasion. That is what I understand. So if school orders food from a restaurant, so this is another issue what I was looking at. Can we tell, for example, we are getting some food from, say, Adigas. So can I tell Adigas not to charge GST as it falls under this particular scheme? So under this particular clause B. This aspect is one which could be looked at. Can a provision or items for preparation of procurement be procured without taxes? See, because here it tells the word use catering, including. So catering are of two types. If it's a composite supply, then the entire provision, everything the caterer only brings. So to have a check on the quality, I only provide the food items. Then what happens in this particular scenario? So this is what I could envisage, but I think it becomes a far-fetched argument that when I am providing the preparation, the items for preparation, I think that becomes a little far-fetched, and I think it may not get the aspect here basically. Then for catering, so there is a separate place which is required, and when the school provides the separate place for preparation of food, they charge separately for the space, either it is a rented or the leased premises, or from the school only is being done. So there are two services. One is the catering, we as a school taking the services of a caterer, that is one, and the caterer taking the services from the school, that is renting of the place for preparation of food. So I think there are two separate aspects which have happened, and for preparation of food, it is supposed to be, I think the rental whatever I am going to shell out becomes taxable is my view. And if for example the school provides the premises free for preparation of food, is there going to be any aspect, can there be a deemed valuation? I think under the GST law, I'm not very sure if rule 28 has to be adopted here for valuation along with section 15. Is there going to be an aspect that I have not looked into it? And if there is any charge, the school recovers the amount from the caterer. This I told that this becomes again a recovery. So I think that should be taxable. Then the other aspect is with regard to the security or cleaning or housekeeping performed for the educational institution. So here, see, I just taken two examples. Security services is given. Say, for example, there is a XYZ group. As a whole, all are under one compound. So there is one, the entire premises are under one compound. What they have, the undergraduate, graduate, they have a school, all these things are there in one compound. So will it be a qua course or a qua institution? So this is what is the aspect which has to be understood. If we go for I think a conservative view, I think there we have to take a credit, whatever exemption only to the extent of what is given for the specific part of the institution, that is if it is a school or up to higher secondary, then there's an exemption. Beyond that, there will not be an exemption. But I have been interacting and I got a view that if it is a qua institution, then probably it becomes a composite supply, and there could be a possibility that we can take a view that it is exempted for the institution as a whole itself. So housekeeping services is provided by, say, SSV Private Limited to RV group of institutions, is located at various locations, single invoice. For example, if we take RV institution, they have a head office at Lalbagh Road, whereas they have different institution like SSMRV or RVPO college. Each one has different colleges. There is RV Dental College. So there are different colleges at different locations, but the invoice goes to the single location, that is the head office. Then what happens? So how the classification has to be looked into, how the exemption has to be seen. So this is one thing. As a service provider, I think we have to be more careful. If I'm providing security services for this particular aspect, then that is one which is supposed to be looked into. I felt this is very important, and this is to be looked into, is my view. And the next one is when it comes to services which are received, which are exempted regards the supplier. The next one is relating to the admission or conduct of examination by such institution up to a higher secondary. So here, there has been this clause before there has been certain changes and amendments which I will take up, where for this before earlier it was mentioned as services relating to admission to or conduct of examination by such institution. Later on there was a clarification which was given for removal of doubts. It is clarified that CBEC shall be treated as educational institution for limited purpose for providing services by way of conduct of examination to students. 4A talks, there was an introduction of 4A from 28 to 23, which tells that for removal of doubts, it is clarified that the authority board or body set up by the central government, state government, including national testing agencies for conduct of entrance examination for admission to educational institution shall be treated as an educational institution for the limited purpose of providing services by way of conduct of an entrance examination for admission of educational institution. So this is one aspect. The other one is services provided by the education institution, where it tells that if there is an AA was introduced, 66 AA, where by an educational institution, by way of conduct of entrance examination against consideration in the form of entrance fee. So if there is some entrance fee which is collected by the service, by the education institution, that also becomes an exempted category per se. So this one, there is a one provision which has been given that provided that nothing contained in subclause 1, 2, and 3 of item B shall apply to an education institution other than an institution providing services by way of preschool education, other than an institution providing services by way of preschool education and education up to secondary higher education or equivalent. So this is one aspect which I felt. So there is a change under from 23 onwards, this particular exemption, there is a change per se. So here when we look at...
1 minute.
Yes, sir.
1 minute. What is the goal of presentation now? You're saying you're going to analyze with respect to recipient, there's an exemption. What you're reading the exemption entry in with thorough detail. That is
Yes,
not
sir.
what are you teaching us this morning?
Okay, here basically I just wanted to bring about this point that there is a change under this particular exemption from 23, where the National Testing Agency, if there is any printing services or anything with respect to the pre and post examination, this becomes exempted as such. So here there was a, in this particular thing.
See, we are going into exemption entry and amendments to exemption entry in thorough detail. But the topic is exemption qua recipient. We should be able to learn how to do interpretation. No matter which is the entry we are looking at, you can take 1 or 2 entries to highlight the learning. If we become expert in this one entry, then we will not understand what to do with other entries.
Okay, sir. Okay. Then I'll I'll not get into much of the provisional, sir. I'll just get into the discussion on the documentation as well as the issues what I have made note of. So basically here in this particular education services, there was one aspect with regard to the printing of pre and post examination. So there were a couple of high court decisions which have, and there is a AR rulings, and based on which it tells that when there is a pre and post examination also for examination, it gets exempted as such. And that has been given in this particular 2 case laws. One is the Sri Rama College of Arts and Care College of Nursing. These two have identified and given that particular exemption. So here with regard to the documentation, what we have to as a service provider keep in mind when it is a recipient based service. So what is the aspect we need to look at? One is a common declaration. I felt we need to take common documentation. One is declaration of satisfying the conditions, because as a educational institution provide certain, we are not getting in, we may not as a security service provider or as a transportation service provider, I may not have details with regard to the what is the nature of the educational institution. I think this at the time of entering into the contract, we have to take sufficient declarations. So this aspect is very important. Then periodically collect approvals. So this particular approvals, what is the approvals, whether this educational institution has got an approval, what sort of approvals have been received, whether it is in the nature of higher secondary or whether it's a university, because there are different category and there's a specific conditions here on this particular aspect. Or it could be purchase orders, SOW, whatever is being given, the payment
Shekhar,
advice.
let me pause.
Yes, sir.
Let me interrupt. Sorry. Now
Yes,
you
sir.
please see, you're saying we have to collect all these documents. When you say we, there are three people we'll take as example. One is the tax manager in RV college. Whether you're saying we should take these documents, you are
No, sir, this
talking
is
to
from the service provider
one,
per se,
one,
sir.
let me. One is the tax manager in the RV college. Second is the tax manager in the Group 4 security agency. Third is the fellow who is filing 99C. Who should do any of this? For the reason I will tell you, the tax manager in RV college wants exemption. Whether it is for the management committee building or for the PU board, he wants to take the exemption. Second, the tax manager in Group 4 security says, sir, anyway, I have only 2 to 3% ITC. Most of my cost is payroll cost. If you tell me that you will give me letter that you are education institution, I will give you exemption. The fellow who's filing 99C comes after the match is over. What document he will ask? What will he declare in the? What will he do as far as 99C is concerned? See, in an ideal world where we are trying to give advice to somebody who is proposing to claim this exemption, we may have to go into the documentation. But today, post facto, what should the chartered accountant do who's filing 99C, or the chartered accountant who is from Group 4 security, what he should do, or from RV college, what he should do?
Yes, sir. So here, when we are looking at, I think you're right to the extent that we have to look at from both service provider and the service recipient angle. And from the service provider angle, when we are looking at, see, today when the departmental audit, as you rightly told that there are departmental audits which are taking place for a couple of service providers who have provided services to these educational institutions. So at that particular point of time, the department is asking, provide us the copies of the agreements what you have entered, or you give a work order copy. So once they see that the work order copy, for example, it's come from RV institution, he tells that if it is RV institutions, the letter is telling RV institutions, but how do I prove that it is an educational institution? Basically, that is what the department is trying to question today. So to cover up this particular aspect, post, as you rightly told that only these aspects are very critical now. So we are supposed to look at the documentation from both the service provider per se and the service recipient per se as well. So here in this aspect, I have mentioned what are all the, from the service provider angle, what are the documentation to be collected. And I think as a service recipient also, we have to satisfy the conditions. And for those satisfying the conditions, the recipient has to look into the specific entry of the notification, that is 12/2017, go through that in depth, and analysis has to be done point wise, and based on that point wise, whether the point or condition has been satisfied is what the declaration has to be given by the recipient to the service provider, or is the service recipient satisfying this condition. So this is the aspect which has to be considered from the service recipient point of view as such. So
sorry, one doubt. Okay, so now service recipient gives a declaration saying that, okay, I will fit into this exemption category, and service provider is claiming exemption. Would that be sufficient? And technically, service recipient is a recipient of a service with a bill, and it's a commercial transaction. If the bill has GST, bill has GST. Bill has no GST, no GST. Should at all service recipient be worried or have any documentation in this regard? Should he be required? Because the levy is on the service provider.
That's right. So to safeguard the service provider itself, that is the point where I was trying to tell. One is the declaration. So if I have to see whether I'm an educational institution, as I told you, if we take an example of an RV institution has an head office. The main lettered, if you see, it specifically only mentions. For example, if you take a software contract, Infosys always has a, if you look at the main contract, will generally be executed with Infosys Bangalore, but the service could be allocated in a different location as such when we are looking as such. So here also what I'm trying to look at is when the work order is being given or when the purchase order is being given for this particular activity, service order. So in the service order, if the lettered is specifically mentioning as RV group of institutions. So RV group of institutions, that is where I was trying to bring about whether it is a qua recipient or a qua institution. So qua course, basically qua course or qua institution. So are we going to look at qua course or are we going to look at the qua institution? So this is where the point we are trying to bring about. So we are supposed to, as a service provider, look at the purchase order as to what is the nature of service and who is the person who is giving this particular documentation, and whether the documentation given is sufficing when we look at the plain reading along with the wording, what is there in the notification, whether it is going to contradict. So in one of the cases, we have taken a view where the service provider, we have taken a view that it is one institution, but nevertheless, there is a gray area in this particular aspect, which is supposed to be kept in mind when we are entering into the contracts. This is what I wanted to bring about. Yes, as you rightly told that just because getting a declaration may not bar the department from collecting the taxes from me as a service provider if those conditions may not get fulfilled. So that is where we also have to be a little more, we have to put a safeguard in this particular aspect and take sufficient documentation or collect documentation. That's what I feel. So yes, sir. When it comes to post facto, already the transactions have happened, then handling the situation becomes more of a litigative front, because we have to go based on the reading of the specific law as such, and we might have to go back to the history, that is the service tax law also.
See, because for the department today, it costs nothing for creating demands. They are the pressure of the target. So when in doubt, they always say that, okay, I don't agree with this. Like all supplies to SEZ, they say, okay, I don't know whether it's supplied to SEZ or not. I have no declaration. So it is not treated as a zero rated. So they would move to a thing saying that you don't fit into this category is what their start point of the argument is.
Correct.
Yeah. So given that being the real practical scenario, what is that we should specifically make them look into? Like as you said, that mere declaration is also not sufficient. So like we emphasizing the client going back and saying that they are fulfilling this condition in strict thing is something we should advise back. Is that what you want to specifically say?
Yes, I want to say that the collection of documentation has become more critical today for the from the service providers angle. Also, it is very important to be taken note of. That's what is my opinion.
Oh,
sir, Jatin sir, your views, sir.
Ilapa, I'm with you on that. But you were mentioning that it's, with respect to recipient, we are going to address it. You concluded saying with respect to supplier.
Allah sir, from recipient also, because Venus, if we look at the thing, he told what are the precautions to be taken from the supplier's angle also was added in the point as such, sir.
Got it. Okay.
In the coverage.
Got it. Okay. Definitely, the very the extent to which one has to examine exemption, you have brought out very clearly. That's very important. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. So, as I think if there is an education institution license which is there and they have cancelled it retrospectively, what happens? So this is one thing I think if there is a situation where educational institution license is cancelled, say with effect from for not satisfying certain conditions or something from so and so date, can it be a retrospectively cancellation or it has to always be a prospective? This I'm not sure, but assuming there is a retrospective cancellation, will it really suffice? So I think as on the date when the documentation or when the service provider had provided the services, the license was intact, I think we can take that particular aspect. And the law also does not expect something which we have to do, which is impossible. So if something which has happened retrospectively as on that particular date, I think we can take that particular view as such. Then this situation of pre and post examination, including university paper setting, there are a lot of activities in respect to the pre and post examination for this particular sector as such. And what happens, this is one point which I wanted to bring about, where if there is a amendment or if there is an entry which has been added to a particular notification, can I consider this exemption from the inception, or should I consider it from that particular day is an aspect of thought? Sir, this is one aspect I was not clear. Can we take a view that if a particular aspect was introduced at a later point of time and it was from the day when the law or when this initial notification was imbibed, can we take that, or should we take it on a prospective effect, sir?
You may have to see the language of the exemption and any mischievous circulars that they have issued to give it retrospective effect. But otherwise, the language only we will be able to come to. We can't use a one size fits all rule.
Okay, sir. Okay. Then there is an aspect with regard to legal service exemptions. So we represented one of the case with regard to an advocate which was there. So only recently when I went through this for this preparation, I learned that there's a difference between advocate and a lawyer itself. So that I was not aware that there's a difference between an advocate and a lawyer basically. And whether registration is mandatory for an advocate, forward charge, reverse charge versus exemption, taxability or reimbursement. So exemptions in case of cross-border transactions. So online services or virtual services which have been implemented today. Then documentation if the service recipient is outside India. So these are some questions of mine with regard to the legal services. I'll not get into much. This was one point I wanted to highlight was advocate are lawyers who are registered with the Bar Council of India of any state. So this is one aspect very important. They can represent a client in the court of law, speaking on behalf of the client, plead their case. So this is what generally an advocate functions. But lawyers are law graduates, but unlike advocate, lawyers are not registered under the Bar Council of any state. So lawyers given legal advice but are not eligible to stand in the court of law on behalf of their clients. So this was one learning for me with specifically when we were looking at for legal services. I was trying to look at the aspect of taxability on reverse charge mechanism basis. And here when I looked at this particular, there could be certain on reverse charge basis who is supposed to pay taxes. I'll not get much into this particular point. So in this, I identified one of the point was when there is a senior advocate. When there is a senior advocate and a senior advocate has given services to another senior advocate, is it really possible? This was one aspect which I could not get a little on clarity, because generally a senior advocate, if the service receiver is a firm or an individual, there is an exemption specifically. Here with regard to the senior advocate, there is no specific exemption, but however, when I just ran through a couple of thought process there, we could see that because as he is an advocate primarily, then any services provided even by a senior advocate to an advocate also gets covered under the previous entry is what there could be one understanding. So this is one gray area which was there. Then from advocate point of view, when they collect the reimbursement of expenses, see many a times what happens when they go for a registration of a property or when they apply before a court of law, so they pay the court fee. They take reimbursement of this court fee, or it could be when they go for a property registration, they pay the fees for the whatever property. It could be a pure service. Once it's a pure service, then there is no taxability. That is what we can take based on the reimbursement. But when we take the overall amount itself as a fees, technically, then what is the aspect which is going to be looked into when it comes as a advocate services? So when I'm paying some ROC, stamp duty is being paid. So once a stamp duty is being paid, so will there be any reverse charge mechanism taxability on this particular aspect is one doubt I got. And can ITC be availed on legal services? I think if the service becomes taxable, then there is going to be an aspect which is to be claimed as an input tax credit. Then distinction between legal services and other consulting services. As an advocate, I provide my services as a criminal case. There's a murder case and I'm pleading before that. So that is one thing. The other one is when there's a drafting of a property deed, which is being given to a individual. I am a lawyer. I provide drafting of a property deed, individual, or I give it to a business entity. So as we all know that a business entity, once it's given to the business entity, then the other person is going to make the payment on RCM. But here, when I'm giving it to an individual, drafting of a deed, will it be considered specifically? I am registered, I am an advocate registered under the Bar Council. So once I'm registered under the Bar Council, once I'm drafting a property deed, am I still satisfying the condition and of a legal service? So this is one of the point which I could not try to lay hand on this particular aspect, because property deed becomes more of a consulting in nature, but it is provided by an advocate. So once I have registered under a as an advocate, what would be the impact? So this is one thing I was not sure. Sir, Jatin sir, on this point, sir.
See, just like our regulations that specify what services we can and cannot provide, there are some services chartered accountants are permitted to provide, which looks like it's nothing to do with chartered accountancy. For example, there is a service called HR services. I don't know what we studied in the course that makes us capable of providing HR services, but whatever it is, if the council says these are all services a chartered accountant as a chartered accountant can provide, then that becomes service of a chartered accountant. Similarly, Bar Council specifies what services an advocate can provide, even if it is remotely legal services in nature, it will fit within the scope of services of an advocate. We can't go into analyzing every minute of the services of a chartered account of an advocate. Is it advocacy or not? So therefore, if it broadly is covered by Bar Council specifications as to what are services an advocate can provide, then that will come within the operation of this entry. If an advocate goes into renting of commercial property, etc., there it will be outside the scope as an advocate. So we may only have to look at, is his qualification as an advocate necessary to provide this service? Second, is his competency based on being an advocate? Based on being an advocate. If those two are there, then I think it should be okay.
Okay. Sir, and one more thing was with regard to legal services. Say, for example, like our firms, we have chartered accountant firm. Similar, there will be a law firm. There will be a couple of partners. There will be who are advocates, but they will hire counsels also. Non-advocates are being hired for particular legal services which is being provided. If it is advocate to advocate, there is no issue. But if I am taking services which are on a reverse charge basis, which which are taken from non-advocates basically, and I am providing this service to, it is more like an intermediary, if we can look at, or a subcontracting sort of a thing if it is being done. What would be the taxability is one aspect I was just trying to look at on this aspect.
See, let's say an advocate doing some merger takes the services of a chartered accountant to do valuation. Now the CA will
Yes, sir.
charge GST on forward charge basis, and
That is
that
right.
cost will be absorbed by the advocate as part of his fees, and his fees will again be subject to full reverse charge. So there will be some cascading, but that is because the way they have arranged their assignment execution, and cascading is something that is easily permitted in GST. Who said cascading should not take place? Cascading can take place.
Services of a foreign firm. So again, it's on the similar lines. So
Now again,
if
if
it's
a
a
foreign firm is recognized as an advocate in India, then import of services RCM won't apply. But if it is not recognized,
yes.
then it will attract RCM in the hands of the advocate firm on import of services without credit.
Okay. Yes, sir. So this was another point. So basically here also we were looking at the documentation. Once it has to be here again, there could be two sides. So as a recipient, so once from a advocate's point of view, when we are going and representing a case, what are the aspects which need to be looked at? So there, what we were from the departmental audit, specifically the department was mainly concerned whether there was a GST number specifically on the invoice if it was given to a business entity, and if it is not a business entity, then they were questioning how is it. Then to prove that whether a business entity or not, we took the PAN number as a basis to see if there is a possibility of and based on the PAN number, we could identify whether it was a firm or an individual or a company or any other thing. And that was being done as such. So that was the documentation aspect. So generally it is, if it is with regard to any other legal services, then surely we will have some certain the case numbers or something. Otherwise, whatever is the documentation, it is the nomenclature or description in the invoice. What is that we are providing and what is the nature of service we are providing, that is going to get defined. So that is the aspect which needs to be considered as such. Then next one which we have which I took up is with regard to the upfront fee, that is serial number 41, which talks about the upfront fee or salami, which is or a premium which is there for a long-term lease for the industrial plots, more for industrial plots or plots for development of infrastructure of finance business. See, this word I was not very clear. So in this notification, there's an exemption which is provided by the state government. That is, maybe you can take something like a KIDB or KSSIDC, probably they are providing certain ownership by any other entity having 20% or more of ownership. So this is what has to be looked in. So whenever we are looking at the ownership which is provided by central government, state government unit to the industrial units or developers in any industrial or financial business area. So here there is a proviso which is there, or a condition, conditions for section 41. Here I was when I was going through, see the aspect why I'm trying to bring about this condition in depth is to understand that we have to look at a little more in depth when it comes to the wordings as such. So it tells in this proviso, it tells provided that the leased plot shall be used for the purpose for which they are allotted, that is for industrial or financing activity in an industrial or financial business area. So there is no meaning we could identify. So we went into the general meaning of industrial plot. So this was given under the Industrial Development Act 1951 or something, which talks about what is an industrial plot. Industrial plot is a piece of land which is used for industrial purpose, such as building factories, warehouses. Industrial establishment is where any of the activities, manufacturing, fabrication, processing, this is all fine. But what do you mean by financial activity in industrial area? And what do you mean by financial activity in a financial business area? This I was really not able to understand, because the wording in the condition is this particular thing. So this I had a doubt. So this I could not add much value, but I think there appears to be something more in this particular activity. What is a financial activity? I could not get much of an idea. So here it tells that once their purpose, when we look at the purpose was granted for a particular purpose of industrial plots, if there is a change in use, then they tell that there is a violation of this particular condition and it is liable for GST. So here when we look at the plots are for initially they were given for industrial activity. Later it was changed to a financial activity. Will the exemption still be available? Because it is falling within the three categories which were there. There's only a swapping between one to the other. That is one. The second one is conversion from industrial to residential or commercial. So if it is converted from industrial to residential, then there is a automatic. For example, now you take in KR Road, one of the MM industrial area which was given earlier. Now they have taken from the industries, they have converted that to either residential or they have taken it as a commercial. So as soon as there's a conversion, because if we look at the proviso 2 and 3, it tells that the state government concerned shall monitor and enforce that this particular condition is satisfied. If there is any violation, then the original lessee, subsequent lessor, buyer or the owner shall be liable to pay such central tax is one condition. And they also tell that if there is a change, then this particular aspect, the original conditions, these conditions have to be mentioned in the deed also. That is what they try to tell in the lease deed or the terms of agreement. So this is what is very important to be looked in. So when we look at this particular classification, say assume that the total term of lease is 30 years. So assume that in 30 years, there is a in between, in the 15th year or something like that, there's a change in use. Does it mean that the entire upfront amount gets taxed, or could we take a contention that it has to be done proportionately? Can we take some view? I felt there is no specific analogy, but I was just trying to see if this can be adopted and we can try to bring some proportionate value or something, because there was a change in use only after a particular point of time. Otherwise, the entire amount becomes taxable as per the proviso which is being mentioned. The wordings which has been mentioned in the notification is clear that the entire amount of upfront free or whatever premium is paid becomes taxable. So this was one of the things. So what are the documents to be looked into? So when we are taking the services, say from a KADB or KSSIDC, the lease agreement, the terms of lease becomes very critical. And what are the terms of lease? All these aspects have to be looked into. And if there is any terms or conditions when we are buying such properties has to be kept in mind when we are looking at a long-term fees lease from the government per se. Sir, here with this regard point, what is a financial activity in an industrial area or financial activity in a financial business area? Anything can we consider like Infosys is also, I think if I'm correct, they have procured the land from KDB or something like that, probably at the initial phase. And are they trying to incorporate something like that? Here was my doubt actually, sir. Anybody can add any inputs on this particular aspect where it is mentioned as financial activity in an industrial area?
Nothing specific, Shekhar.
Okay. And next,
these activities would be taken care by the investigative wing of the GST, right? It wouldn't go to audit generally. It's like a revenue.
No, I don't know. When they try to bring about this point, maybe for us directly, it may not impact as such. Maybe, okay. Let us look at that. Then the next serial number which I took was 41B, which talks about again upfront fee with regard to construction of residential apartments by a promoter in a project. Here they tell that if there are some unsold flats as on the date of OC or the first occupation, whichever is earlier, as when we take this particular aspect, they tell that there is a proportionate tax which has to be paid on the number of flats which have remained unsold. And this is relating to the residential units. So they have given a suggested a formula which is supposed to be done. So in principle, in case of a residential apartments or residential transaction which is taken care. So I think in principle, they want a 5% tax, and this is one of the methodology where they have brought about if there was any unsold flats, I think, and this has been also ratified by notifications which have been given in 2019, 3, 4, 5 and 6. So this gets covered under that particular classification. And here, if it is an affordable residential, it tells that the value of tax payable should not be 1%, that is 0.5% of CGST, 0.5% of SGST, or 5% of the total residential apartment value in case of other than affordable housing. So this also has been on similar lines. So for this, I think we need to maintain what is the probably if it is a JDA, the JDA agreement copy, completion completion certificate, or the OC, the plan approval date, what is the total number of square feet of the project, what has been sold, what has been unsold. We'll have to capture all this information for this particular and we have to do the workings based on this particular aspect. The sale agreements, wherever if the value of advance has already been received for to arrive at the sold portion. So that is one aspect which has to be kept. For the remaining unsold, we have to identify and reverse the transaction per se. So then the other aspect was with regard to 41A. 41A also talks about the TDR or FSI, when there is an additional FSI which is being given. So here also, when the aspect of construction, this is also in relation to construction of residential accommodation. Here also similar conditions that if there are unsold flats as on the date of completion certificate or the first occupancy, whichever is earlier, similar formula has been earmarked, and we'll have to do a reversal on this particular. So what are the documents? So similar documents on previous thing will be applicable, and we will have to whatever remains unbooked, the calculations have to be taken forward. Then the other aspect, one more, even though it's not an exemption, I try to take it up to understand what are the documentation or what are the aspects which needs to be kept when the services are provided by director to a company. So who is a director? It's defined under 234 and 146, 149.6, but nowhere the word director has been defined under the GST Act. It takes reference to the Companies Act, and Circular 140 defines it of 2020 defines who is a director. So here, when the taxability comes, it depends on the nature of services what has been rendered by the director to the company, and it could be in the form of different mechanisms. I identified around 4 types of services. So one is if it is a director, he is in the capacity of an employee. Then if he is an employee director, then in that particular case, the documentation probably which could be maintained is the employment agreement, DIR 12, then you have pay slips under TDS under 192, Form 16, DIR 3, shareholders approval for remuneration getting fixed, MGT 14, MGT 7. So these are all from the other acts which can be taken in support that the services provided are in the nature of employer-employee relationship. If it's an independent director, then there is a separate documentation. Generally, from the ROC side, what are the documentation? This can help us in supporting our stand that as a director, I need not pay any tax on forward charge, and it is the responsibility of the company to pay taxes, because the issue is always it comes that it has to be paid on the reverse charge mechanism. If it is an independent director, then these are the documents which are supposed to be looked into.
Shekhar,
then yeah.
What is the exemption in the services provided by the director?
No, I specifically told that this is not covered under exemption as such. So this is only to see whether a forward charge is applicable or whether an RCM is applicable. So this is only to bring about this point, what are the documentation, and on whom, whenever the department comes on the director, what are the documentation to be checked, or from the company side, what are the documents to be maintained. This is the only thing.
There is no exemption in any of these services?
No. There is no exemption per se. This is only to take up documentation point, I took up this heading as such, basically.
Okay.
Then director providing services under personal capacity, it could be loan has been provided. Then if a loan is provided, then what are the documentation to be looked into? It could be a loan agreement, board resolution approving the loan, then a security charges provided against the loan, then security registration, whatever registration under, it could be a MDTD or it could be a guarantor agreement which is registered before the sub-registrar office, or it could be a TDS which has been done under 194. So these are all a couple of things which are there. Consultancy services provided, it could be where here it could be a board resolution of the director, consultancy agreement. So these are all the documentation which could be. And if the guarantee is provided by a director, what are the things which needs to be done, which needs to be captured? Then if it is a property, then it is a qua rent, whatever is, and it becomes a property related documentation, it's always a forward charge as such. So this was one of the aspects. This was the documentation which I tried to look at. This is the documentation. Then the next one which comes is services, government services. So here when we look at government services, there are a couple of aspects, but here first of all, when services has to be, whether it's from the central government or state government, state government is not defined under the GST Act. We have to go to the General Clauses Act or the Constitution to get the supporting as to what is the central government, state government, or a union territory. Then we also have to understand who is a local authority, what is a governmental authority, government entity, and business entity. So these are ones which are commonly used wordings when we look at an exemption entry under government services. These are the first definitions which are supposed to be looked into, and whether a particular service falls under when services have been allocated by the panchayat or a municipality, then there are certain exemptions for pure service. So we have to look at whether we can satisfy each of the condition of 243 G or 243 W, where a list of services have been identified. So we have to look in depth what are the services. So just to understand what are the different types of organization under which category they fall, just have tried to identify. So organizations with respect to government authorities, it could be BBMP, BMRDA, BDA, BMRCL. Again, here we have to understand when it is a government entity, when it is a government authority, or when it is a local authority. So these are aspects which are supposed to be looked into. So here, when we look at an exemption, just to understand, there are pure service. So when pure services is there for any function with respect to 243G or 243W, what are the aspects to be considered? So this one aspect is supposed to be looked at. So here, when we look at, this was another serial number 3A, which talks about value of supply of goods, where constitution of the value of goods is less than 25% of the value of the composite supply. So this generally a composite supply. This was in one of the cases we examined that there is a bore well. So bore well, if it is a free bore well which is being done and the panchayat allocates that bore well work to one of the contractors based on tendering process, then here the value of the goods which have been sent, we'll have to understand that, say for a bore well, they give around 2 lakhs is the bore well cost, or based on the depth at which the bore well is being drilled into. So there could be a component of goods. The component of goods should not cost more than 25%. So this is where the condition is, and this becomes a specific entry where we have to examine each contract wise whether the value of goods constitute 25% or more. So this was one of the condition where we had to examine, and I think one case is also there before the KAT under the earlier service tax regime. We have been fighting one case based on this particular analogy as such. And once there is an exemption, subcontract, when there is an exemption for subcontract as such, is there any exemption for subcontractor? When only 11/2017 serial number 9 gives that whatever rate applicable for the principal contractor, the same also will be applicable for the subcontractor is one point which is there. But here notification 11, when that particular reading, can it be brought into this particular exemption also, is a point I have not examined. So this could be one of the point which could be examined or taken up as such.
Shekhar, now there is no longer that exemption of exemption to subcontractor.
I think it is still there now, notification 11/17. I think it is serial number 9, if I'm correct.
Okay, let me relook.
Okay, Ivan, I recently also we took one of the stand based on the subcontract, but anyway, yeah, okay, I'll also recheck on that point, this one. So generally for a government contract, what is that we need to look at? So what is the contract, nature of the contract? What is the work order? What is the agreement of work? What is the running bill, certified engineer approval, TDS under what rate? So always this government contracts, there has been certain changes in the rates also. Initially it was 5%, later on it was made 12%. A few things were at 12%, 18%, it was changed to 12%. So when there's a time of supply, because at the time of awarding the contract had a particular rate of tax, but when there's a change in the rate of tax, what happens? Because this is when in respect to the government service, even today, when we take the 17, 18 or the initial year of GST, the GST amount is not paid by the government whenever they have given, because the initial, it was only service tax, and later on we had to give a couple of citations that the GST amount has to be given based on the new contract. Any new contract under the GST, we did not have much of a problem, but when there was a transition between the service tax and GST, there was this particular rate change, and they had a little of impact on that particular aspect. So with respect to this, as I told you, if the value of goods, so for every calculation, we need to maintain the working papers. So I think government, I'll not take up much things. I'll take up this one where the consideration does not exceed 5,000. So if I'm taking the services of the government, and if the value does not exceed 5,000 rupees, it could be a mining related or royalty related aspect where we are supposed to make the tax remittances. Then what happens in this particular aspect? Whether, for example, ROC filing fee is 700, late fee is 6,500, whether there's an exemption or not. So these are a few aspects which have to be kept when there are particular exemptions which have been given, does not exceed 5,000. Is it 5,000 rupees per day, 5,000 rupees per transaction? These are all aspects still. So wherever in doubt, we always tell that go for the conservative view so that you don't have any issue at a later point of time in this regard. Then one entry was with respect to old age home provided by a central government, state government, or entity under 12AA. So here it's there are residents against the consideration of 25,000 rupees per month per member. So here there are two conditions to be satisfied. One is 60 years and another one is 25,000. So what happens if the person is less than 60 years? And it tells that consideration is inclusive of all charges for boarding, lodging, and maintenance. So here, when it comes to maintenance, are we calling the consideration is inclusive of food? Okay, understood. But medical expense for each person could be different. And when I'm charging a separate medical bill for the medical expenses separately, can I have two rack rates which are done? One is inclusive of food, boarding, and maintenance, and one I can collect the medical expenses on separately. So will there still, I will have an exemption, or can this medical expenses also be covered under this particular 25,000? This is an aspect I could not maybe a little more analysis on this point. So if some members are below the 60 years of age, what happens? So when it comes for an audit, so 12AA, when it comes for an audit, the department could ask, provide the deduction, what is the registration under 12AA, and the invoices which have been raised, ID proofs of the members. So to prove that the people are above 60 years, probably a declaration, one is a declaration, or if they don't have an ID proof, then probably I think we can take, I think ID most of them should have, but even now, because when we are looking at senior citizens, see Aadhaar and all, later on it has got introduced. So if a person is say 80 plus or 90 plus and he does not have any ID, then how do I take note of or prove the age is one aspect which needs to be looked at, or probably a couple of photographs or something of those people or the inmates and what are the activities, and documents regarding payment received, including the amounts received. So these are all aspects, assuming that there are two people who are that is a father and mother, both have been admitted into this old age home or into this old age home which is run, and one son, he gives say one check of 40,000 or 50,000, then should be considered as individual person. So that is where I think only the payments may not play a vital role. Even the invoices along with the payments become a supporting aspect which needs to be examined. Then the other aspect is with regard to when a grant or a donation is given on a conditional basis. So when there is an exemption which is given for grants, which is grants by the central government, state government, or if it is a 12AA institution getting any grants or a donation which has been received, where there's an advertisement which is given. Say, for example, in this case, there is a trust, VET trust, and Infosys has given a school bus purchase of, okay, will not take a school bus. Actually, it is probably we could have considered it as an ambulance, assuming an ambulance has been provided or something, ambulance, and Infosys has given it to the trust for maintenance of this particular activity. And on the bus, they mentioned that this is this particular bus has been donated by this particular ambulance is donated by Infosys. So will it be treated as an activity which is in the nature of advertisement as per circular 116 of 2019 has given that there should not be a benefit arising out of this, and that benefit should not be inculcated in the form of an advertisement, or it should not become more like a marketing for that particular, and it should not benefit the donator per se. That is what is the aspect which was considered. So we need to look at this as an aspect, and if it is given as a token of gratitude, then that should not matter, but it should not become an aspect of marketing. That is very, very subjective, and that aspect also has to be considered when some donations or conditions have been received. Then services by charitable activities could be one of the things where 12AA activities where it is being given. So here, I think I'll not take too much on this particular thing, because one is charitable activity. If they had some accommodation where the room rent was less than 1,000 rupees, or Kalyana Mandap or open area where there is a charge of rupees 10,000 a day, less than 10,000, rented shops less than 10,000 a month. So these are few conditions to be satisfied. So we have to see what are those aspects, whether it is in the precincts. What do you mean by precincts? So now, for example, you take a big temple, for example, Tirupati, you take Tirupati. If you take the entire premises belongs to Tirupati, Tirumala. So Tirumala, when the temple is there and precincts of the temple, when you call, so how far-fetched or till what area this precincts has to be taken forward, how it works. So this is an aspect which is supposed to be examined when we are looking at the documentation which needs to be looked at. With respect to goods, I just touched upon. One is supplies to SEZ was one thing I just tried to look at. So when there is a aspect, so it could be when there are supplies, it could be from DTA to SEZ or SEZ to DTA. So what are the documentation which needs to be maintained? So here, when we look at specifically a supply to SEZ to DTA, it tells that we need to maintain the documentation like purchase order or along with the invoice, which clearly indicates. So this has been mentioned under the Rule 46 itself. What is the aspects, or when the aspects of supply to SEZ is being done, LUT number or the ARN number, which is their packing list, e-way bill. I think if there's a requirement, even probably e-invoice also. I think e-invoice is not mandatory because it's for exports. So this particular thing has to be looked into.
No, it's
here,
mandatory. E-invoice.
It's mandatory. Okay, then e-invoice also has to be added. When it is a service also, we have to look at the purchase order. What are the statement of work, or we could consider the purchase order. Then if it is without payment of duty, then LUT or a bond is required. If it is with payment of duty, then there is no bond which is required. We will be showing that the payment of taxes is being done for the purpose of SEZ developer for authorized operations. What are these authorized operations? So under the GST law, there is no list of specified operations, but under the service tax law, there were around, I think there were, this is what was the list of authorized operations which was available under 2013. And in this one aspect when we were looking at was with regard to the accommodation services which has been procured by the SEZ. For example, Infosys SEZ takes the services of say Holiday Inn which is outside. So should it be taxed or should it or can they claim an exemption? Considering this accommodation service is there in the list, then I think still there is an exemption could be taken, is my view. So then there is a aspect where there are re-import of goods from SEZ. There is an exemption which is there. There is no tax which needs to be paid. There is no import duty which needs to be paid on this particular aspect. But there are certain documentation with regard to the original export documents as well as the import documents. What was the item which went? So what was the proof of alteration? Had it come for a repair or had it come for what was the process? So that process has to be looked into along with the e-way bill, packing list, shipping bill, export invoice. Then again, you will have to take a purchase order, import whatever is the documentation to prove this particular thing. In customs, whatever documentation is required, in the same way, here also for an SEZ, when the goods are moving from a DTA to SEZ and back. So this particular documentation plays a very vital role. So when we consider that during audit, what are the aspects the documentation is looked at? So 125 circular talks about a refund, but I think the same documentation, what is required will be in principle adopted here as well. But when we go for a refund or when we have looked at a couple of audits where the intelligence people or the audit wing has come for verification, they have asked for something more than these items also, like when the goods have been transferred from when it is given for the aspect, they tell that once it is gone to an SEZ, so the proof of receipt of goods, they tell that there is an acknowledged copy of the officer is required for the receipt of goods or services into the SEZ. So stamping of this particular thing is very mandatory of any goods which have been supplied to the SEZ for claiming exemption is what the officers are of the opinion, considering the erstwhile law as well. Then the other aspect is actually this is not an exemption per se again. So this was sale of scrap. I took this topic to just examine the aspect with regard to the latest TDS aspect which was looked into. So I tried to understand what or for whom this particular entry is taxable, which is eligible for TDS to be done. So first of all, we need to understand what is the difference between scrap and a waste to understand what this particular aspect, because scrap there is generally used for a recyclable basis, whereas waste is completely, it may be unusable is what, and generally waste is considered not to have any economic value, but scrap again, it could be reused. So here, when we were just recently examining one of the case, see, one complete company closed down and they sold the entire furniture, fixtures, and whatever they had, the entire thing was sold. So at that point, because for them, because for shutting down the unit, they sold the value and the entire goods were given. It could be computers, laptops, tables, chairs, everything were given off, and it was given off as a scrap item. So, or it was given at a very, very nominal value. So is the value going to determine whether it's a scrap or whether it is a aspect which needs to be considered? So when we looked at the GST chart, there are a couple of HSN classification along with the description of goods. There are some specific rates for this particular thing. However, it tells this particular, recently there was a change in this TDS provision, which told that procurement, there was, if you are buying scrap and if it is the scrap is falling under chapter ID 72 to 81, then TDS is to be done. Then TDS on value of transactions exceeding 2,50,000, rate applicable is 2%. So how do I identify for the person who is giving the scrap and for the person who is receiving this particular activity? What for the scrap was received? For example, if you take aluminum scrap or from a precision component unit. So if we buy a scrap and that scrap is utilized again for remelting and used for some other activity, then that could be considered as a scrap. So are there any conditions to be satisfied with regard to the scrap? This was one aspect, and in that particular point, we identified that this is not basically directly a scrap. When the goods are being sold, it could be computers, laptops, they are considered more of a e-waste. So that comes under classification 85, and that will not be specifically getting covered under this classification where TDS is applicable. So I think this classification has to be read in depth, and the use of the scrap or how is it being done is the aspect which needs to be considered. I think with this, I have just tried to touch base upon a couple of aspects and different angles I've tried to take upon. So now I am open for any questions or in this regard. Thank you.
Shekhar, so some of the questions which I had during the thing, I have put it in the chat. So can we start taking that and then we will open it for others?
First one is Krish is a simple day nursery or a preschool for young children. Most corporates pay attention, pay directly to the service providers. Would this be taxable? Who is a service recipient? So I think whether a corporate pays or whether the service provider pays, whether the person whose children are being taken care, the parents, I think whether that plays a vital role or not is an aspect which even I told you, because they're pre-nursery. Generally, if you take pre-KG is a Montessori's type of lookout, where in a Montessori type or a preschool which is being done, generally it is ranging between 2.5 years to above is considered under preschool. So a creche is a separate thing, which is, I think it will not be considered as a preschool is my view, because see, generally for a preschool, I think they have to have one, I think Karnataka government provides some permission for preschools to monitor them is what I think earlier I had
no educational license for a preschool. So it is not governed by the educational institution regulation. While running most of these daycare centers, they don't require a permission from the education board.
Okay, then probably we might have to look into the general meaning of the word preschool, and whether this creche also fits into it is one aspect we have to look at it. Then outdoor catering includes
that being the case, Shekhar, then people who are claiming these exemptions, okay, under the preschool. I know a lot of preschools are not paying GST. Okay. Now, that being the case, now when there is no absolute clarity or anything, so the chance of they getting taxed would also be high, correct?
Correct. See, preschool generally, if you look at it, is they teach them, these children, they teach them. But in a creche, it is more of a play area. And I think if I'm correct, they may not have too much of a teaching, which is there as such. Creche is more of taking care of the children, because at the time the mother, she is working. So just to match the number of hours on a daily basis, that is creche also talks care of. That is where I brought about the word daycare. So is there a difference between daycare and the preschool is what I try to bring about. If it is a daycare, I think it is a taxable activity according to me, because that is not a preschool technically. And generally
technically
this daycare,
it's not a school.
Yeah, because preschool, if you take, there's a timing, for example, 8 to 1 or 8 to 12, something like that is there. But in a daycare or a creche, there is no timing if you look at. So in a daycare, generally the parents leave the children in morning 8 o'clock, and once or 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, depending on their office timings. And once they are coming out of the office, the children are taken care till about 5 or 6 in the evening also in a couple of daycares. So I think that daycare, there is a slight difference between the preschool is what I look at there.
So the question is, when we say preschool, are we saying pre space a school, or are we saying preschool per se in one word, it itself being a school?
That's what I feel. School, because the word school is used, there appears to be an amount of curriculum or something which is going to be there in the modus what those people are going to have as such.
Yeah, if you are reading it as a single word, then it is a school. But if you
Correct.
segregate and read, saying that it is something prior to the school. So even before the school starts, this is an activity, then it doesn't need to be a school. So it's a
okay. Or can we call
preschool.
it as a preschool? Can we call it as a school which is preparing for getting
Not
into
a
the
school. What
schooling?
I'm saying is anything activity starting before the school is a preschool.
Correct. And if you look at creche, probably the number of months or the time frame also, as I told you, there is a timing difference. One thing, the number of hours could be varied. So because one thing, as there is no regulatory body, as you are telling, then there could be an aspect of these are the points which needs to be considered, I feel.
Yeah.
Then Anpurna madam has put
so
outdoor.
if in a creche which is in a corporate Shekhar, still I feel that is an extended Aya services. It is like hiring a maid at home versus I have hired a maid at the office. Okay, who is taking care of my kid?
That's right.
So
That's right.
I
What
still
you're
have my
telling.
own my own doubts whether the exemptions can be extended.
Yeah, for creche, it is not possible, is what I was telling. Creche and daycare,
Correct.
I think exemption should not be given, is my view. The aspect, if there is a curriculum, if there is a timing for a particular whatever they have on time, then I think it should, it defines based on the curriculum whether it is there or not. Defines the aspect is what my view is. And outdoor catering includes the occasional also. Yeah, I think that should, whether it's occasional or whether it's a regular one, that doesn't, I think it should not bar. Should we ideally say, when in doubt, no exemption? I think again, that's right, because I think if in case of doubt, yes, I think this particular aspect has to be considered on the same lines per se. Then in case of security agencies, worry would be worry should be by the education institution, right? I think here we have spoken a little on that aspect already. It is get covered. Then base tutorials is a popular coaching for engineering others, tie up with other colleges and most students.
Shekhar, on the security services specifically, why I was brought that up is security services comes under RCM.
Correct.
So if it is not proved as a security, the education institution, so then it should be the institution who should be paying tax and not the agency, security agency.
Okay, once once I get covered under the education till the higher secondary, then there is no RCM also applicable, correct?
Correct.
So only if it is going for any other institution like a university or any other thing which is not covered under the higher secondary, only for them RCM will be applicable.
Correct.
Then base tutorial is a popular coaching for engineering and others. They tie up with the colleges most. Okay, I think you are speaking about the integrated colleges which are coming nowadays. So under an integrated coaching, according to me, see, if it is considered as a consideration for the time being enforced, if there's a law for the time being enforced, I think if this particular thing has to be bifurcated into two, one is the regular coaching and another one is the base coaching which is being given, and base whatever is there, generally I think I think okay, somebody has confirmed also, base is charging GST, so it is that becomes a separate, if it is considered as a package, then it could be a different view, but I think there I think base has to be considered as a separate activity itself. these exempted categories should be asked to surrender registration, or else they have to comply with RCM. I didn't get this question, Venu.
No, generally, exempted entities doesn't need to have registration. So should we advise them to surrender their registrations?
Not very clear on that point.
Okay.
The land allotted by SIPCOT long-term lease is sold after 10 years. So what does happens by way of sale deed? Right here, this is where I also had a doubt. If there is in between, there's a sale which is happening. A long-term lease is for 30 years, but there's a sale. There is no issue. But the buyer also should be under the same category. If it is an industrial, it has to be under
Buyer is
industrial.
of the same category. He is using it for the industry. Now the lease right is not provided by the specified organization. Lease right is now provided by the person who has received the lease right under SIPCOT.
Okay. This is from the recipient category you're speaking about. Say, if I have got a allocation from KIADB, I sell it to you. Then in that particular case, you're asking what happens to the consideration, what you pay to me, right?
Correct.
I think there it becomes taxable because that particular transaction, there is no exemption specifically because it is only given by the state government or that special central government or their undertakings only for them. So here it becomes a taxable activity.
But when I am actually selling, I am valuing the building that I have constructed. So there's a building which is there in the premises.
But I think if I'm correct, long-term lease, even if it is above 30 years also, I think there are a couple of judgments which have told that there is a taxability with regard to the long-term lease, if I'm correct. Okay. I don't remember the citation. OC applied in March. Certificate came in September. So status of units sold between March to September. I think we have to consider either the OC date, application date will not suffice. So I have to take the OC date, or if it is first occupation is done, only those two will be considered. So if your OC has got in September, then March to September will become taxable. Lot of charitable.
Let's say there are some units already sold. Let's say in March itself, some sale did happen, registrations happened. There is the moment if the sale did done, it itself indicates that that's the first occupation.
See, sale deed per se does not indicate the completion of the project. Sale deed only transfers the right in ownership, and that might not.
No,
there may be a couple of things.
No, sale deed happens only after completion of the project. Otherwise, I cannot. They cannot transfer something.
See, this is a contradiction because in a couple of cases where we have observed is. See, under construction also a couple of people, see if they want immediate right in the sale which has happened. So many people, they don't mind even registering the property under construction also. Just because a sale deed, I think sale deed will not, the first occupancy is, that is the reason they have used the word the first occupation. So first occupations means you should have either got electricity, water, all the facilities should be there. Otherwise, nobody can be habited in that particular complex as such. So that
currently
is the reason.
Everything is there, Shekhar, everything is there. It's just that there is a delay in sanction of the OC by the respective authority. Like there is a water connection, there is a KEB, and after the sale deed, the buyer pays the electricity directly.
Okay, then in that case, as you are mentioning, so then I think let us not get into the sale deed aspect is what I feel. You can take that as a supporting, but
okay.
But I feel if you are telling electricity, water, then each of the meters should have already come. And the handover letter should have happened. If handover letter has happened for that particular first handover letter, I think that can be considered as a aspect, and that can become the supporting aspect for that, I feel.
Okay.
Then a lot of charitable institutions are getting anonymous donations for applications of their activities. Let us say some funds are used for applied as expenditure to the activities other than listed in the GST exemption notification. See, anonymous donations. Okay. I think anonymous donations can be there to some extent under the income tax, if I'm correct, but I don't know the prescribed limits. So even if it is anonymous, it is still only under the income tax, it becomes taxable. But under the GST, the specific thing is it is whether there is a income tax exemption under 12AA or not is the main activity which needs to be considered, along with what are the activities mentioned under the GST law. If the activity is not for that particular expenditure, then questions could be raised by the income tax, not under the GST is my view. Maybe can you give an example here? I didn't understand the second portion of it.
Let's say a charitable institution which is in the business of providing free food, shelter, education to the needy people.
Okay.
Okay, that's what it is doing, the charitable activity, and it is receiving donations. Now, that institute, let's say, it went ahead and participated in some other activities, like, let's say, sari run by women. So it conducted and it said that, okay, let us encourage some more women category thing. Now this spend is happening from a donation received, where at the time of receipt of donation, it was subjected to exemption, saying that this is for the charitable activities specified in the GST itself. But promoting,
I think expenditures, if you look at the GST exemption, is not for expenditures. It is for the receipt of the funds in the form of a donation.
So at the time of receipt of the fund, you received the fund for this, but you have used the fund for something else.
Okay. So maybe you if we consider it as a stopgap, for example, I got funds for a building fund, but I utilized it for some other activity which is charitable in nature only. Okay. So I think it should be fine because overall it is coming for a charitable activity and you have in good faith taken it for a specified purpose. But I think if I'm correct, we can take the approval of the concerned person. If he is there, we can take that there's a change of use and it can be utilized for that particular other activities as well, if I'm correct. I'm not very clear on the aspect with regard to the income tax, how it goes about. And under the GST, there is no such activity that it has to be for a specific expenditure is not the point. Only on receipt basis, this was looked at, if I'm correct.
No, GST is very specific. Not all charitable institutions get. They have listed the charitable activities.
So that is only for activities provided by a charitable institution when the donation or grant is received. But is there any service that charitable institute is providing to the donor?
Now, if the Mailar, so basically it's a quid pro quo. Now, I have received money from someone, but I'm providing service to other. And if it doesn't fit into that, then the definition of consideration, the 231, read with 15.2. So, money received from a third party for this activity should also be treated as supply, value of supply. It's like you gave me the money, I provided the service to Shekhar.
Correct. See, in a donation, as Mailar was telling, there is no quid pro quo, right? It is only specific for a particular purpose, generally. And your question is, can that be utilized for some other activity is what you are trying to bring about.
No, what I am saying is, you are saying it as donation, but I am saying is it is a consideration for the future service given to Shekhar, money received from Mailar.
Sir, again, see, end usage or service. See, normally in charitable activity, the condition is usage, not the service. For example, if the fund is for uplifting the
Women,
underprivileged,
underprivileged children, girls.
underprivileged. That is the restriction imposed on the usage of fund, not a service provided by charitable act, charitable institution. It is qua usage of money and not qua service. For example, if I say you have to provide service to this particular person, then I say what you're saying that it will amount to service and other thing. Where the fund is qua usage, then it is a restriction and usage of fund. That is not a direction to provide service.
Correct. What my question is, in given this scenario, I am not using for that, and I am using for something else which is not listed as an exemption charitable activity under GST. Like promoting a sari run, like some other activity is definitely not a exempted activity.
Again, see one one amount you are given to them. The condition is only usage. There is no supply, so it is not taxable. Next question you are saying that fund has been used for activity which is not listed in the exemption schedule. Whether from the tax fund you are using it so that you are not collecting the amount from others. So there is no consideration. There also there is no tax. But the exemption is useful only where, for example, giving yoga and collecting fees. Then only this exemption will useful. Otherwise, where there is no consideration and the donated fund has been used for that activity, there also there will not be any taxability, is my opinion.
Getting. So what I am saying is a far-fetched thinking. If you go ahead and then look at saying that the service provided to these activities which you are saying, you have already connected that money in the donation. So someone is paying for you.
Maybe I'll just go through this, Venu, and I think we'll do a little more analysis. I'll come back to you probably.
So it is like a subsidy, my lord. So this is a this activity, like someone participating in that run should pay me 1,000 rupees, but I am collecting 100 rupees, or I'm not collecting anything because someone has given me a subsidy to it for this, and subsidies could be post activity or pre activity. So again, that is a view an officer can take. I'm not saying that. Yeah.
Correct. Again, what now it is? I am able to little bit link it what your question is. See, there can be two kinds of activity where your subsidy is directly related to sale price. For example, say yoga camp. I am saying normal charges is 100 rupees. The institution provides normally for 100 rupees per participants. Because you are given donation of 20 rupees, they are charging now 80 rupees. Now your question is whether it is for 80 rupees or 100 rupees.
Correct.
If it is directly sale price, as what you said, it is correct. It will be taxable at 100. But if the donation is indirectly for providing yoga and the charitable institution use that and gives us subsidized price, then I don't think it is taxable. If it is directly linked to sale price, for example, what you're saying, I'll give 20 rupees for each activity you're done, then it is taxable. If you are given 1 lakh and say you use it for this purpose and the education institute use it and use at a subsidized price, if there is no direct correlation, then I don't think it is included. If there is a direct correlation, then fully taxable. I'll agree with that point.
Yeah. Shekhar, please continue.
Makes sense, sir?
Okay. See, when I come from the tax officer point, I can still litigate your view. It's like you are giving me as a SS's point. I am not fully convinced with your answer. That's all I'll say. What you said makes sense, but I am still not convinced.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
I'm making a supply to an SEZ unit. However, the SEZ unit is not registered under GST yet. Would this still be qualified as a zero rated supply? This aspect I have to look into. I'm not checked it on this. Anybody have any views on this one?
Mylar Abhishek. Vijay sir may give an answer.
You mean to say it is already registered under SEZ Act, but is not under GST?
Correct.
See, I think if we consider SEZ Act will be overriding all the acts in the country, right? When we look at.
Correct.
So whether registration itself per se going to bar me the exemption or whatever zero rated, I think it should not, is my view.
Now, when you are saying it should not,
have you ever come across cases where SEZ unit is not registered under GST law?
madam, it like
It can be, no?
registration is a process. It may take 3 months, and it will generally they for whenever they are setting it up, they always do the all activities and also take the GST registration. But in the intermittent supplies that I'm making.
Okay, the condition for zero rated supply is supplied to a SEZ unit or developer for authorized operations. So there is nowhere stipulation that it should be registered under GST.
How will you report it under GST? If you have to report anything under table 6B, GST number is mandatory. If you have to report it under table 8, it should be an exempted service. If you are reporting under table 7, then it is a B2C taxable activity.
Sir, reporting is secondary. First, taxability. According to me, what Bhuneshwari madam says makes sense, because any supply to SEZ registered under GST is not an exemption. Any supply to SEZ is exempt. Then reporting is a second aspect, because they might not have foreseen this.
Considering this hypothetical scenario,
This is a live scenario.
Oh, okay. If the SEZ unit is not registered under GST, you will make supply without payment of GST. I don't think you are going to pay GST and claim refund.
Correct.
Okay, so reporting in GSTR1, as Mylar said, is not going to determine whether it is zero rated or not.
Because I have to do e-invoice. How do I do an e-invoice without a registration number?
Sir, export also we are doing e-invoice, no sir, without GST registration number.
But export portal permits. The classification, I take it as export. But when you take a classification as SEZ, portal doesn't permit.
Okay. So we'll write a letter to GST officer, because of all these practical issues, we are not able to comply with it. But still, zero rated.
Okay, so we will go ahead and continue to claim the zero rated benefit.
Yeah, that's what I'm feeling.
Okay. All questions answered, Shekhar?
I think most of them are done, I feel. Yeah. Okay, thank you for the group. Actually, this session gave me a lot of insights when it comes to exemption, and thank Venu for giving me this topic. Thank the mentors for giving us valuable inputs at the required time and wherever corrections are required. Thank you.
Any other points for discussion from anyone? By the way, today we don't have second session, that we are pushing it to 7th Jan. Our next session should be on 31st December, but already I have received 3 requests saying that 31st December I will not be available. Now, I don't want to be surprised by 3 more requests on 31st December. So I'm thinking we will move it to 7th Jan. Is it okay for everyone, or we'll go ahead with 31st Jan?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, fine. Any questions to Shekhar?
No, only one point. Shekhar, during your presentation regarding the list of services for authorized operations, I think you mentioned there was a list under service tax, but under GST, there is no list. Am I correct? in?
Yes.
Okay, so there is a uniform list of services which has been notified. So when you are making a supply of service, you have to see whether it is already covered in the uniform list of services. So if it is covered, then you are assured that it is for authorized operation, but you should still insist on getting the endorsement from the proper officer of the SEZ.
No, this authorized list of operations, is it given under the GST law or under the service tax law? I remember
under
that
the
was given under
the
SEZ Act, I guess.
Correct. That is under the SEZ Act. The same list continues. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. If it is not covered under that, then you have to check whether the SEZ unit or developer has taken approval for getting that service covered under the list of services for authorized operations.
So then we need to get the list of authorized operations for that particular entity from the, if it is not a part of the general list.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I stand corrected on that particular point. Thank you.
Shekhar sir, what is your opinion on Qua Education Institute or Qua? See, the same example what you have taken on RV School of Education, where they have university, college, preschool. So, what about the inverse supply received from security charges? You're saying it should be Qua Institute or Qua campus? Whether we need to take
I am of the
invoices.
view that it is a course, I feel, because there are specific up to higher secondary is a separate thing, and you have a university that is separate. When we take all this separately, so then I feel it should be course and not institution is my view. But when I was speaking with Rajesh on this particular point, he was mentioning that they have taken a view that it is possible in a couple of cases. I wanted his point. I was not sure whether he was there today actually in the presentation. So probably I'll just take that update and we can discuss it one of the days next time.
No, Rajesh,
if you see, hello, sir, if you see that proviso, sir, there the proviso says, notwithstanding anything condition shall apply to education institution other than the institution providing service by way of preschool education and education up to secondary year. So they are saying they are carving out inside the education institution, they are carving out some courses outside it. So you cannot apply for education institution. It has to be applied for services provided by education institution.
Correct. That is my view. But Rajesh was of a different view. I think I'll take that update. That's what I was telling on that point.
It is what type of education institution. So both are educational institutions, but a type of educational institution.
Correct. That's what even I thought. So if it is a multiple course they have, it is better to take a different invoices other than going with the splitting it.
But an educational institution having an admin office at a elsewhere place.
Correct. When that is there, admin office, I will not be able to take the exemption, right? If it is a common admin office when we take.
APS school or VVN, okay, VVN school is right side, left side is the admin office. So there is a gate for admin office on the left side, right side is the school another gate. So there you will always find two security guards. One security guarding the school, one security guard guarding the admin building.
Correct.
Shouldn't the exemption be extended?
See, generally what happens, Venu, if everything is under one complex and if it is not having any other activity, like for example, a university for BCom course or something is not there, then we will not have any issue technically. But for the other, there is going to be an issue. Here, we can consider admin office of the school as a part of the school only, technically, because there is nothing else other than the school as such in this particular premises. But are there any other activities which are conducted by the by this admin office, and they are also trying to look at some other overlooking some other blocks of education? That is what has to be looked in again.
See, because if it is input tax credit, turnover based, something we could have done, but it is a taxability by other person and based on my nature of activity. So in this case, if it is purely covered under exemption, then it is exempt. Even some limb is not covered. So as you say, as Shekhar sir says, if it is purely for covered education services, then it can be applied as exempt. And if Venu sir's example, where admin having administration of both, then I think it should be taxed.
Yeah. Any other point by anyone? Okay, great. So let's conclude for the day. Thank you, Shekhar. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.